Good morning. Welcome to the Lex Factor. Today we have Mr. Mat Cashman from OIC. He and I are going to chat about gamma as it relates to implied volatility. Wait till you hear this one. So let's get to it after the bell. Rain down the Cashman.
Here it comes.
The only thing that I would say about the $100 notes is back in our day, there were probably $1,000 notes or even bigger than that.
Fair enough. And they also had different pictures on them. Do you remember when they redesigned the $100 bill? That was a big deal.
I don't remember that. What was it? It was
it had a much smaller picture, and it was just right. It wasn't they redesigned it so that the picture was different, and it was kind of like not symmetrical anymore, right? It was larger on one side than on the other side.
I remember. Do you have any of those left?
The $100 bills of the old ones.
Yeah. You know what? I don't listen.
I left my wallet at home. Oh wait, I am at home. Never mind.
Yes, I am at home. Let's call it what it is. I'm sorry, I don't carry cash around anymore like I used to be, Cashman. I'm a Venmo guy. If even the valet guy loves Venmo, I'm like, everyone loves Venmo. Give me a Venmo guy. Oh my God, it's unbelievable. I don't think I've ever
Venmoed a valet guy.
Oh, I do, because go to the club. You go in like the kind of stuff I'm wearing now that you can't see. I never carry cash. I show up like, oh God, I forgot my cash. Give me the Venmo code.
Oh my goodness, that's fantastic. I love it.
Bam. Good. How you been? Everything good?
Man, I've been good. I've been traveling a lot. I took a very European kind of like idea toward August. I took basically almost all of August off.
Wow.
Yeah, it reminded me kind of my days in London when I used to call around during August, and everyone would be like, "Oh, not here, mate. He's south of France. Sorry." I'd be like, "What? Awesome. Does anyone work here during August?" And apparently, no one in Europe does. So I decided I was going to do that this year.
Yeah, that's good. See what happens, kids, when you get to be a big guy like Matt. You get to take the whole month of August off. It's unbelievable. Right. And go to Europe.
Exactly.
See? Good. All right, so let's get to it, right? Gamma as it relates to IV, and I'm going to let you lay it all up, but it's an interesting concept because I think most folks, especially on the retail side, probably confuse this a little bit or don't even think about it for that matter.
Yes, they think about it. I think they think about it in, they try to think about it in the right way, but I think it gets a little convoluted in their minds. So I have a lot of conversations about options, obviously, with like all kinds of people. And every so often I get caught off guard by concepts that people conflate in a different way in their minds. And I'm usually surprised by it, right? Like, one of those that's particularly, I think, hard to kind of understand is gamma or stated gamma, the amount of gamma an option has relative to its implied volatility level. Now, you and I understand this kind of intuitively because we've had positions where we're long a lot of options that are at an exceptionally high volatility level or short a lot of options that are at an exceptionally high volatility level. And you get to see how they actually react when things move around and as the vol level moves and what it does to your Greeks. But if you haven't seen that in your position, it's a little harder to think about it that way. So to cut to the chase, most people, when I ask them, think that implied volatility levels and gamma are positively correlated.
Meaning that when one goes up, the other one follows it in some degree of,
Correct. And or another way to think about it is options that are priced at an elevated implied volatility level also have a lot of gamma. And the actual opposite of that is true. This is part of the reason why I think this is interesting, is because options that are priced at exceptionally high implied volatility levels actually have very low stated amounts of gamma. Meaning they don't move around in price as much per $1 move in the underlying.
Got it. So let's take a step back. You may get there eventually, but let's just do it now. I know we have newbies who like to watch, so let's define gamma and delta. I think we're going to talk about that mostly. We probably won't get into rho and vega and theta too much. Let's stay there. Let's stay with gamma and delta. So let's first define. Let's go delta first, and then we'll go gamma. Is that okay?
So delta and gamma, I think, are perfect things to define for this conversation. Delta is the amount that an option's price changes per $1 move in the underlying.
Okay.
So if you're trading a $20 stock and the option that you have has a 15 delta, it's usually expressed as a decimal 0.15. And what that is telling you, what your model is telling you, that for every $1 move in the underlying, in the stock or the index or whatever you're trading, this option should theoretically move 15 cents, 0.15. It's expressed as a delta, or it's expressed as a decimal for that reason.
But let me interrupt real quick, because the cool cats at the cocktail party don't say I have a 0.15 delta. They say, hey, dude, my delta is a 15.
Yes, they say it's a 15 delta, or that option has a 15 delta.
That's right. But it really means 0.15.
It really means 0.15 when you express it mathematically. And if you're talking to someone who's a quant or a mathematically kind of leaning person, that's how they're going to not only think about it, but how they're going to write it.
Correct.
You and I, when we talk about it, you say like, what are you going to dinner tonight? And I would say, I don't know, I'm a 50 delta, right? That means there's a 50% chance I'm showing up and a 50% chance I'm on my couch at home. But so that's delta, okay?
Right.
And deltas can be positive or negative, right? Based on whether or not it's a put or a call. And gamma is the other concept here. Gamma is the actual rate of change of delta. For that same $1 move in the underlying, if the option that we just talked about, which has a 15 delta, right, has a 4 gamma, that means that delta should actually move by 4 for every $1 move in the underlying. So if you're starting with a 15 delta option and it has 4 gamma and the stock moves up by $1, at the end of that dollar move, that option is going to have a 19 delta.
Right. So sounds like I've heard people say this, and I might get this a little wrong, so correct me here. Delta's kind of speed, gamma kind of acceleration, something like that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. When I talk about it in terms where I want to teach people how this works without actually using math, those are the concepts I use. If you're driving along and you look down at your speedometer and you're going 50 miles an hour, that's kind of like your delta. And if you step on the gas and your car moves exceptionally fast to 100 miles an hour, your car has a lot of what we would call gamma, right? It has the ability to change very quickly.
Gotcha. Okay, good. I hope that makes sense for everyone. So
So
always
delta and gamma.
Leave comments in the comment section below if you have questions, and we will answer them, believe it or not.
Oh, nice. I like that. Okay, so with those two things out of the way, I want to talk about this in terms of, and the thing that I always use to explain this concept is 2008. The reason why I tell this story is because I think it's exceptionally instructive. In 2008, if you were to Lex walked up to me outside of the SPX pit one morning on a Tuesday, random Tuesday, and said, hey, Cashman, we're going to settle 6 standard deviations away tomorrow from where we are now. And I would say, okay, bring it on, right? Like, let's get to it. I'm tired of talking. Let's go trade. The reason why that's not something crazy that he would have said, which otherwise in a normal marketplace would be a crazy thing to say. Right? Like, we're going to be settling 6 standard deviations away. Why? What's going to happen? Did the president get shot? Like, what happened? The reason why in 2008 that I wouldn't have blinked when you said that is because that happened all the time.
Yeah.
It was an exceptionally volatile marketplace, right? The delivered volatility of the index was through the roof. We were moving 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 standard deviations 3 times a week. It wasn't a big deal. Now, when you think about that mentally, the way people tend to deal with those marketplaces when they're exceptionally volatile is they start to adjust their mental model. They start to think about all of these different price iterations, right? The settlement of the underlying start to take on an equally likely potential in their mind, right? It becomes like, we're not just going to settle around the mean. We might settle way over here. We might settle way over here. We might settle way over here. And everything starts to become equally as likely. When you think about it that way, what's really happening from an option perspective is that you're taking a normal distribution curve that has curvature to it. The reason it has curvature to it is because most of the actual underlying price settlements are clustered around the mean.
Yep.
And the ends are wings that don't happen all that often. What happens when you get into a marketplace where everything becomes equally as likely?
Right.
The entire distribution starts to flatten out.
Yep.
Right. It goes from looking like this to looking like this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now let's take a step back and think about what that means for an option that's on this part of the curve and an option that's on this part of the curve.
Mm-hmm.
Normally, a distribution would look like this, right? But when a distribution looks like this and it's flat, is there any change between the option being over here and being over here on the curve?
No, not
the
really.
The answer is no, because it's a flat line. It's a flat distribution.
Yeah.
That's an extreme example, but the extreme example is there for a reason, to teach you when you get into an exceptionally volatile environment and all the price iterations, the settlements become equally as likely, what you've done is you've removed the potential for the options to actually change delta. Because when volatility goes infinite, when it goes straight up to an infinite level, all of the options, because of that flat line distribution, all of them tend toward a 50 delta.
Yep.
And if
it's
option
coin
starts,
toss theory.
Exactly. Everything becomes a coin toss, right?
Yep.
Everything becomes a coin flip. And if everything becomes a coin flip and your option starts as a 50 delta, and then you move 5 standard deviations and it's still a 50 delta, did your option change delta at all? No, it did not. And thus, its gamma is what?
It's also gamma. Yeah, it's 0. And what's interesting is that, getting back to your main point from the beginning, is that implied volatility, in this case, we're being very exaggerated, saying infinity practically.
Yes.
Your gamma actually goes down. It's inversely proportional.
Correct. It has to go down, because what you've done is you've essentially kind of modeled an environment where everything is moving all over the place all the time. The closer you get to infinite vol, the closer you are getting to 0 gamma. Right. And that's why they are actually infinitely correlated.
Right.
So what that means.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you got to finish your thought there, because I want to think about something that I haven't thought about, but go ahead.
Okay. So what that means, I like to transmit this as an idea. What that means from the retail side of things is that you need to pay attention, especially if you're going to be trading things delta neutral and hedging things delta neutral, as to what the actual gamma of the option is, and think about it relative to how high the implied vol is. Right. If you're looking at an option that has a really high implied vol, you need to think beforehand, it's going to take even more of an underlying move to make this option change its delta, because of all the things that we just discussed, right? It's a big difference in how your position's going to change when things move around.
Okay. So what does that say, if anything, about price, right? So here's my thinking, right? You have a deep in the money option with this infinity volatility.
Okay.
You need to have parity to the option. Okay, let's call it a call for that matter. So you have to have some price that's much greater potentially than the at the money option, because there's no parity to at the money options, right? It's just all juice. So you have to have parity first, and then you have time value above and beyond that.
Correct.
So all options aren't the same price necessarily. In that,
no,
because now you have to have relationships of combos, boxes, butterflies, all that kind of stuff has to still make sense, because you can't buy butterflies for credits and have 0 risk in infinite volatility.
No, you cannot do that.
Right.
However, it's important to think about price and implied vol are generally positively correlated, right? The higher a price of an option, the higher the extrinsic portion of the options value, the higher, generally speaking, its implied vol is. But I didn't say that like all options are moving toward the same price.
That's correct. Delta. We want to make sure we understand that. That's an important point here. That's why I brought it up.
Yes.
Super important.
I think that is important. The important thing here is that you think about how the delta of the option changes as implied vol goes to infinity. Because if you're dealing with options that are deep in the money, and let's say they start with a 95 delta, as you raise the implied vol of that option, it's going to become more expensive, but its delta is actually going to go down.
That's right, which is really counterintuitive.
Correct.
For folks. Yeah.
But you need to think about it in these terms, right? When you have an option that has like a 95 delta in an exceptionally low implied volatility environment, the reason why it has a 95 delta is because you have a very high level of certainty that that option is going to remain in the money at expiration.
Yep.
As you increase the actual implied vol and you start to increase the actual assumption of the fact that the market is going to be moving around, your certainty level of that option finishing in the money has to go down necessarily, right?
That's right.
Because if you are saying all of these price settlement numbers have the same likelihood of happening, they all, what we said before, have a 50 delta. They all have a coin flip. And so in the money options actually lose delta as you raise implied volatility, and out of the money options actually gain delta. They tend toward the 50. So if you have an option that has less than a 50 delta, when you raise the implied vol on it by a significant margin, its delta is going to go up. And if you have an option that is in the money that has a higher than a 50 delta and you raise implied vol significantly, its delta is going to go down. It's going to go, they're both going to tend toward that 50 delta level.
Right. So this is also a kind of an explanation of Vana too. I don't want to get into the woods too much, but Vana is how your deltas change with implied volatility movement too.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
So, and you know, we talk a lot about this, and I think the retail world has become very interested in this, mainly because the market making community does very similar things. Now, granted, when you and I were down there, it's definitely changed a good bit because there's like 10 of them left. And I'm sure they have massive books that they kind of disperse and cross hedge and blah, blah, blah. So they're not hedging every delta move or their gamma as much as they probably did in the old days.
Yeah.
But it tends to give a little bit of a secret away to the investing retail public what the dealers might have. And if implied volatility is going up in a position where it's known that dealers are long options, or long calls, let's say, that delta is going to go up, and typically they have to be delta neutral, typically, all things being equal. So if their deltas are going higher on long calls, they got to sell some stock.
Yes.
Technically, sell something that's going to put a little pressure on the underlying, potentially. Nothing's a guarantee, but potentially, right?
Absolutely.
So and then that brings in the whole sticky strike concept and all that kind of craziness. And people look at that now, and that's a big deal all of a sudden, that gamma and Vana and charm with decay of deltas, etc.
Yes.
So it's a very interesting concept. But all this stuff, and the point I'm trying to make generally is that this is really important stuff to understand conceptually, right?
Absolutely.
You may not, as a retail person, you may not have it on the front of your ship all the time, but understanding how these things interplay, really important to getting the whole model right.
Yes.
Would you agree?
I agree completely. Part of the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because I've run into a couple of different people who, let's say, I would expect to have a more nuanced understanding of this concept that did not.
Really?
Right? That actually just kind of talked about it in a way that made me think, like, I wonder if they understand what the actual relationship between implied vol and delta is, right? Or implied vol and gamma.
Right.
One of the things that's really interesting is, so I worked at DRW for a while, and I went in and had an interview with Don Wilson at the beginning of my tenure there. And in the middle of a conversation, he said to me, he took a piece of paper in the interview as I was sitting across the desk from me. He took a piece of paper and he put a pencil on it and he slid it across to me and he said, draw me a graph of implied vol versus gamma. And I was like, it was like 2002, right? I had been trading for like 3 years or 4 years. God. And I was just like, Okay. And so I started thinking about it. I was like, I'm going to need a minute. He was like, take as long as you want. I don't care. And then he like, pulled his phone, his BlackBerry out and started like typing emails. And it took me forever, right? And I finally like kind of came to it, but it took me a long time to like get to that point. And so I think it's important to understand how those two things are interrelated, because it makes a difference as to how you think about when you look at an option that has an exceptionally high implied vol. It's a different way to think about it, right? It's a different way to conceive of it. A lot of times people, I think, just assume that things are moving around a lot, thus implied vols are really high, thus gamma of options must be very high.
Right. No, I think that I agree with that.
That's not true, right? That's
not true. And I think generally people probably believe that to be true. That's a common assumption, I think, right off the bat without thinking about it for a second.
Yes.
Yeah.
But right, you can understand how dangerous that kind of like thinking is. When the actual exact opposite of that is the truth at the end of that mindset, right? Yes. Implied vols are high because things are moving around a lot. However, the option that you just bought has no gamma.
Right? No, I agree with that. So let me ask you a question. I know, and your answer is going to be, I can't answer that question, but how would you best describe a good idea for higher implied volatility environments relative to this whole concept? Is there something we should look at more than others in these environments relative to a position? And this is not investment advice. I'm going to throw the full disclaimer. We are not RIAs, and we're not giving you trading advice, blah, 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 blah.
I'm glad you said it, because now I don't have to. But
now you don't have to. It's just conceptually, are these, I'm getting at something to think about that you may want to consider. That's all. I'm getting at.
Well, one of the things that I think conceptually, people who are exceptionally sophisticated as far as options are concerned, they think about options in terms of what is my position now and what is my position going to be when the stock maybe gets to that level, right? So like things like that can be out of the money call butterflies, right? Or like, call 1x2s. What do I want to have on when the stock goes from 50 to 90?
Right.
And maybe the answer is you might want to be long the 60, 90 call 1x2.
Sure.
Or the 2x3. Or the, and what that does is it takes a relatively neutral position that you have right now, and it says, if we're going to go up here and implied vols are going to be through the roof, what I want to have up there is to be short implied vol, right? Like you might think of that. And what you can do is tailor a position in that situation that actually creates that as a function of the movement of the underlying.
Got it.
And sometimes people utilize that in that way when they have a slightly more nuanced understanding of vol surface and things like that.
I like to talk about the implied volatility kind of sphere, let's say, with folks, especially more retail folks. That's all I deal with now. And my biggest point is this: is that make sure you understand your underlying relative to implied volatility. And my point is that I don't want to necessarily see folks buying expensive implied volatility and selling cheap volatility. Now, there is a caveat, believe it or not. And some of the mathematicians and economists and really, really, really smart people will say, well, wait a minute. Sometimes implied volatility is under or over VIXed relative to the asset in question. I say that is absolutely true. So that means potentially that in high implied volatility environments, you're actually selling more things than you're buying, but you're also buying something up there too. You got to buy something as a hedge. You're just not going to be naked short unless you're Susquehanna and you've got unlimited money,
right?
And you can weather the storm, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's certainly one way to conceive of it and to think about it. But in order to think about it that way, you have to have a much more nuanced understanding of implied vol relative to all the other Greeks.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Yeah, and I like to, and folks get it. And I said, listen, be a student of implied volatility relative to your product. There's so many, our product at Tradier has a great implied volatility or volatility workshop. It will tell you things. Now, is it absolute? Of course not. Anything I thought this market was going to retrace after its big comeback. It didn't. It kept going higher. Okay, what you do? I was wrong, right? You're going to be wrong. It's going to happen sometimes. But again, the whole game about trading is edge accumulation.
Yeah.
And it's edge across Greeks. It's edge across implied volatility and space and movement. Edge everywhere, right?
Absolutely.
Grab your piece of it and have yourself a humbury.
The other thing that I think we can encourage people to do in situations like that, and this goes to the idea of what you just said, which is be a student of the process and of the math behind the scenes. And I don't know how the Tradier actual vol surface thing works.
Yep.
But if you have the ability to look at an options Greeks and then change the implied vol, like a vol slider on it, to be like, okay, well, what does this thing look like if instead of it's a 20 vol, it's a 70 vol?
Yeah.
Right. Like, what do the Greeks of that look like? If you have that ability, that can be really, really instructive and can actually be very, it can be very revealing as far as the math is concerned and what the option might do in a situation when vol doubles or something like that. Right.
100%.
Because I guarantee it's going to, especially the first time you do it, it's going to freak you out as to that's weird. Why did the delta on that option go down when I raised vol? Guess what? It's probably an in the money option, right? Yeah. And those kinds of things, once you do that a couple of times or 5 times or whatever, it's going to start to really recursively kind of start to work in your mind, and you're going to have a much deeper understanding of how the actual Greeks work, and you're going to make better decisions about vol. That's all there is to it,
I agree.
And that's really my mission is to make sure that people understand that. I know it's your mission too, to make sure that people have a better understanding of that, broadly, and then to build on that as they go, right? Because you can't understand everything.
No, I totally. So and before we go, I see we're getting into the time zone here. One of the things that I do a lot of with SPX is I look at the zero DTs I always play, right? But then I also look at where implied volatility is. I don't like doing short on condors and low implied volatility environments, but sometimes I like to do double calendars, a put one and a call one on an expected value move kind of things. And here's and I'll just say this and let you respond, and we got to get out of here. But I know that a 1 day calendar on an expected move with a really low implied volatility is anywhere from $6.50 to, let's call it $8 to pay for both calendars. Okay. Just believe it.
It's basically a strangle swap, right? Is what you're talking about.
Yeah. In the environment we're in now, guess what that same exact value is today, or price, I should say, not value. It's $22, $25. So that's a big deal, right? We've had some volatility of late, and IV and SPX is much higher than a 12. So I'm talking about a 12 environment in the 7.5 zone. I could buy those then, and they're 22. I'm not paying 22 when I normally get it at 7.5. I'm doing something else. That's all I'm saying.
I completely understand. I think it's important to point out that difference in price from 6.5 to 8 to 22 can be a function of 2 different things. One is just the spread between those 2 vols, and then the other one is just the overall giant level of implied vol, which is, I think, what you're talking about. You're talking about the entire curve just went like this. Right?
Yeah. So and where we get the tighter spreads on odd volatility, implied volatilities between months is on an earnings play in an actual equity. So you get a 200 vol in the month in question, and the next cycle is 75 or 600 or 60.
Correct.
That you can get cheapness there too, but in SPX you don't have earnings, so you have similar volatilities across the board. They're either high or low or medium, and you get these price levels. And I just gotten good at knowing, what those prices are around certain implied volatilities. And it's amazing. I noticed the other day, I just looked at it just randomly because I never do it. And I was like, oh my God, it's up to 22. Holy cow.
Yeah. When the strangle swap is
that's in the stratosphere. I might fall and hurt myself up there.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of, and what that really speaks to is that the overall implied vol level is very high.
Yep.
And thus those actual options, much like what we just talked about, those options, when you're buying a much higher implied vol, the actual underlying has to move so much more for you to actually make money on them. Why? Because gamma and implied vol are negatively correlated. They look like this, right? They look like that. So
that's right.
Keep that in mind.
So guess what? That is such a good closer. It's unbelievable.
Boom.
You just hit the bell for me almost.
I just full circled that.
You full circled that. So Matt, always great to see you. Love talking to you. I wish I could get on the big guy's calendar a lot. I mean, a lot more. I'm going to twist some OIC arms to get you regularly, man. I'm going to start.
Well, first of all, no one was on the big guy's calendar in August. Okay. That's the number one thing. I was gone, but I'm always happy to come on here, Lex. It's always a good time. And I love talking about options. So
awesome. Mat Cashman. Did I get it right? Can I say you're at the OIC, or do I have to say the OCC's OIC?
You can say both. Either one is fine. I work at the OCC. I'm an OIC instructor. You know, the whole night.
Yeah, the whole dog ball. So we have such a similar background too. So just tell them how cool we are. And
I mean,
really,
on a scale of 1 to 10, it's like 75.
75 coolness. Wait till you see us walk around Chicago, autographs everywhere. It's embarrassing.
Yeah, Lex just constantly asking people for their Venmos so he can just shoot them $5 in Venmo.
Here, take a 5. Get out of here.
Yeah. I love it.
All right, Matt. Good to see you. We'll do it again soon. Have a great rest of the day and a great September, man.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, man.
Awesome.
It was a good time.
Thanks.
All right.
You know how the financial world goes. Here comes the buzzkill. Please make sure to take some time to read this boring disclaimer. We will owe you one.